Let's get physical. Let's get... Okay, I need to learn stuff. Why is America so good at everything? Clog the U.S. ports of entry. Right now, I don't know. I'll be honest. I just you see this bag over here? I just had a sunflower seeds. I've been eating sunflower seeds all day. I'm pretty sure I had like 500 sunflower seeds with the shell on them. And my mouth hurts. Oh God, who was he gonna debate? I bought another house today, peasants. Oh God. Trump caves on tariffs. Adam. Why?
The US dollar dominates global trade. In 2019, some 88% of international transactions involved US dollars. No other currencies came close. That gives the US extraordinary power over nearly anyone who imports or exports anything anywhere. Commodities like oil, gold, and coffee are all priced in dollars, regardless of where they come from. Extraordinary power over nearly no other currencies came close. That gives the US extraordinary power over nearly anyone who imports or exports anything anywhere. Commodities like oil, gold, and coffee are all priced in dollars, regardless of where they come from. But this clout has long frustrated America's rivals, making them vulnerable to US trade sanctions. Here's how the global economy runs on the US dollar, and why some countries are developing alternative systems that could chip away at the dollar's dominance.
The dollar came to dominate trade after World War II.
Thank you, Chris, for becoming a tier 1 member. I don't know if you were already. Thank you.
The U.S. was the biggest economy in the world. Other countries were trying to...
Was Trump's first few months successful? Oh yeah, by zero standards. I feel like I'd want to prepare for that somewhat. You know what I mean? Because there's a few like stats I'd rather, I want to get together for that kind of stuff too. Like the manufacturing spending that's grinded to a halt since Trump took over.
Rebuild, and the dollar, it was stable and plentiful.
In 1944, a conference of 44 nations agreed to peg their currencies to the US dollar, while the dollar itself was pegged to gold. As global trade grew, so did the use of the dollar to conduct the world's business. Even after the United States abandoned the gold standard in 1971, the dollar remained the world's currency of choice.
The world has gotten used to doing business in dollars because it's just easier than doing business in any other currency. The dollar is incredibly liquid, meaning it's easy to buy and sell things all over the world. The US banking system is very efficient, and those things combine to make it cheaper for businesses to buy and sell in dollars.
Here's how a typical international transaction works in US dollars. A Canadian lumber company sells boards to a French home builder. The buyer's bank in France and the seller's bank in Canada settle the payment in dollars via correspondent banks in the United States. These correspondent banks have accounts at the United States Federal Reserve. The money is transferred seamlessly between these banks' Fed accounts because their status as correspondent banks means they are seen as safe counterparties. The United States says the use of these correspondent banks means every transaction technically touches US soil, giving it legal jurisdiction and compelling foreign countries to abide by its laws on money laundering and corruption.
What cut do we get then?
After 9/11, the U.S. used the power of the dollar to advance its foreign policy goals. The idea was to cut out the sources of funding for terror organizations.
The U.S. used its control of the dollar to increase surveillance of global money flows and curb financing toward bad actors. It did this by imposing sanctions on its rivals. Under the system, if a business or country tries to trade with a sanctioned entity in dollars, the U.S. has the power to cut off its access to U.S. currency. But other countries have been building workarounds. Some EU countries opposed the US sanctions against Iran. These sanctions, put in place after the US withdrew from the Iranian nuclear deal in 2018, included banning dollar transactions with Iranian banks. As a result, the EU is developing a euro-backed system that is designed to facilitate trade between Europe and Iran without sending money across borders.
The EU countries still in the Iran deal are trying to figure out a way to work around the US system so they can
Okay, what benefit? I'm trying to see the direct benefit because I'm too stupid.
dollar still dominates global trade. You can see that in the standoff between the US and Iraq. Iraq says they want to throw US troops out of the country. The US said, we'll cut you off from your dollars.
So if we lost our status as the world reserve currency, what's the main thing we lose? If the United, I'm just curious about this because you hear a lot of it. If the United States stops being world currency, what do they lose? Really curious about that. You know what's weird? I didn't take any I took no ADHD drugs today. I took no ADHD drugs, and my brain is thirsty.
So remember when we said the Trump administration
knowledge.
snatched an unknown number of immigrants from the streets of America without any due process, no hearings, no trials, and renditioned them off to detention centers in Trump-friendly jurisdictions, then sent them on flights to a Salvadoran torture prison where they will be placed under the watchful eye of the guy who describes himself as the coolest dictator in the world? Well, we have an update. Things have gotten worse. Things have gotten much, much worse. And honestly, despite everything that's happening in the world, I think this ought to be the most important news story in the country. Now, these actions triggered a wave of lawsuits that we previously covered. Then at the 11th hour, Judge Boasberg swooped in to save the day, ordering the government to turn the planes around. Then the government thumbed its nose at the order and continued to send people to the gulag with zero opportunity for due process, while simultaneously declaring that their inability to do so was an emergency worthy of a stay by the DC Circuit Court.
I mean, I could talk to him. I have nothing better to do. For real.
And eventually the Supreme Court. Now, this broke with 249 years of American legal precedent, and this could very well be the beginning of the end of one of our country's founding legal principles, the right to due process. None of the individuals detained have ever been found guilty of any crime, nor were any of them charged with one. In fact, most of them were on the government's radar because they were attempting to go through the U.S. immigration system the legal way, via immigration courts. And yet Donald Trump has appointed himself their judge, jury, and executioner.
They empty jails out. Other nations emptied their jails into the United States. It's an invasion. And these are criminals, many, many criminals. Murderers, drug dealers at the highest level, drug lords, people from mental institutions. That's an invasion.
Whether citizen or not, anyone detained by the U.S. is entitled to due process as a constitutional right. But those rights are in question now. So first, a quick refresher of the facts, horrifying as they are. The named plaintiffs, identified only by their initials, are a group of 5 Venezuelan nationals who are being detained by the government. The lead plaintiff, JGG, arrived in the United States in March of 2024 and sought asylum. According to his court filings, he fled Venezuela because he had been tortured, arbitrarily imprisoned, and beaten by the Venezuelan police, whom he claimed will continue to retaliate against him because his stepfather is a political dissident. Like many of the other plaintiffs in this case, JGG was already going through the legal steps of the immigration process. He even had a hearing scheduled regarding his asylum application. And I will remind you, asylum is legal immigration. And while it may or may not be true that everything he has alleged is true, that's the purpose of the asylum process, to determine if it's true, and if it is, at the end of that process, he would be granted asylum and would be a legal resident in the United States. Apparently, though, that process was moving too slowly for the Trump administration because instead of waiting for the immigration system to properly adjudicate JGG's asylum case by doing, inefficient
US dollar becomes the US peso. No, I'm wondering, like, what do you lose when you lose a reserve currency? Like, what's the main thing? If Trump kills the dollar, wait, here's one about Trump. Here's a video about Trump. Higher borrowing costs. So we'd have to have higher interest rates on government debt. We can still borrow debt. I know it's harder to borrow debt, but there's higher interest associated with it. Harder to access debt. I need to learn more about that. We can run trade deficits without immediate adverse effects. So if we have a weaker dollar, we need more exports. For what reason? What reason in the economy? Inflationary pressures, depreciation, global influence will be dying, geopolitical leverage, financial market volatility. I'm trying to just understand better. Reserve currency stuff. Yeah, I mean,
this video is brought to you by Ground News. For the best part of a century, the US dollar has been the world's dominant reserve currency. Despite recurring talks of however, Trump and his team seem set on testing back. Reserves has remained relatively steady for decades, and US treasuries are the backbone of the global financial system.
Usually they buy U.S. Treasury bonds, but they're being dumped right now, right? Because there's less confidence in America as a concept. So what happens if everyone loses concept in America? You know, like I saw them. The bond market is what Trump said made him change his mind.
However, Trump and his team
When
seem
is this
set
from?
on testing the dollar's
10
dominance
days ago?
to its limits, borrowing more and more money, and apparently even
We have months, not years, till the crash. I know we have months, not years. I know we're gonna be in a crash soon, no matter what. I mean, we were already going to. We were already gonna have a crash. Now it's just like gonna be worse with Herbert Hoover as president.
flirting with a so-called reprofiling or outright default. So in this video, we're going to take another look at the US dollar and why some people think its status as the world's reserve currency could finally be coming to an end.
But okay, if they drop U.S. Treasury bonds, okay, yields on the bond have to go higher. Now, does that mean it'll go higher to attract more people to buy them? If they're really high, then if you buy it, it's a higher return. But where else do they take that capital then? If they dump, let's say they take money out of the market and they take money out of the bonds, where does it go? In other markets? If investors take money out of market and also sell US bond, where does it usually go?
Who's more influential, Trump or Putin? Well, we asked the TLDR team and audience to rank a bunch of powerful people, and we have the results.
Okay, so if they can't buy into an investment in the stock market or treasury bonds, they go to money market funds, which are probably really stable investment accounts, I assume, like a money market account. That'd be a smaller growth rate, though, I'd assume. Foreign bonds, currencies, German bonds, Japanese bonds. It does like so the goal of the what's it called? What's the currency called? What's the currency called for Russia and China? The BRIC, the BRICS currency. So would you, like, for example, if they build up the BRICS currency enough, is their goal to make it so that their bonds for that are reliable? Like, would that be the goal with that currency? Yeah. Rumbles. Ripples. Ripples like the chips. Ruble. How does BRICS work? Is BRICS just like a shared currency? Who is the central? Is there a central source for the BRICS currency that they do?
Find out the full list in the next copy of This Story. This is usually because the institutions like to hold in their foreign exchange reserves. This is usually because these currencies are...
I know this stuff is boring, but it's probably worth looking into a little bit.
The administration has been intellectually dishonest. They know by lowering interest rates or by pressuring the Fed to lower interest rates, that really is not going to fix any of the problems that they've created.
All right, I'm excited to welcome my friend Dan Nathan to the show. Dan has worked in finance for nearly 30 years, first as an equities and options trader, but more recently as a financial analyst on CNBC. Nice. And on his excellent podcast, the
Who's
Risk
that one?
Reversal podcast, aptly named Dan, given these crazy stock market swings. Good to see you.
It's great to see you, Tommy. I'm really glad to be on your pod.
It's very, very fun. So I want to talk about your show, how we know each other, all that stuff in a minute. But first, let's just dive into the news about these crazy stock market swings. So the S&P 500 was up over 9% yesterday. For those who don't know, the S&P 500 is kind of like the primary benchmark.
If you're here, I'll talk to Raislin said about Rob. I don't have anyone calling into this ever. So, I mean, I'll talk to whoever. Yen, US, any other currency. I think we should just trade, I don't know. How can I know?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Greer, thanks for being here, and I enjoyed our conversation in the office last month. Let me begin by saying, as I suspect you know, that I am not a great fan of unfettered free trade. I helped lead the effort when I was in the House against NAFTA, against permanent normal trade relations with China. I will never forget a visit that I made to the Macadillo area in Mexico, where I saw brand new factories.
Bernie killed it. Bernie killed it on CNN last night.
And literally
Yeah, if it's a trading block, but is there a standard currency they would use, or like what's the main backer? Like, what guarantees the stability of that? Or is it like a block in a different sense? I assume China's leading it.
Mexican workers
right?
living
like, is
in
it housed
cardboard
somewhere? Is it like housed somewhere, or is it like a independent thing?
boxes. And the result, of course, was the loss of hundreds of thousands of jobs, good-paying jobs in this country, transferring them to Mexico, where people work for horrendous wages. That is the type of trade policy which I
Yeah, who's facilitating the facilitating the conversion?
detest. But I want to move to an area to talk about the legal basis of what President Trump has done. President Trump said, Mr. Greer, that he had no choice in terms of Canada, and I live 50 miles away from the Canadian border. He had no choice but to bypass Congress and to impose an emergency 25% tariff on Canada to stop, quote, the massive, end quote, amount of fentanyl, and, quote, the millions and millions.
Okay, the BRICS Bank is in Shanghai. Okay, funds, infrastructure, and development projects in BRICS countries. So that's like their bank, their central, not really a central bank, obviously, but it's in Shanghai, and they help facilitate the infrastructure in other areas. And I assume Europe wants their own version of this. I know they were talking about having different financial transaction methods. Transactions in national currencies, not just USD. Then there's also the cross-border interbank payment system China has for settling international. Okay. Bypass sanctions. Then sanctions wouldn't matter, right? At that point, if every country, is that their logic for like the blockchain and crypto, is they can bypass every single government then, right? Right.
Millions of undocumented immigrants coming from the northern border. Unfortunately, that's a lie. The truth is that the U.S. Customs and Border Protection reported just 43 pounds of fentanyl was seized at the Canadian border last year, representing just 0.2% of the total. Now,
someone said Trump is going to be known as the president that saved America from being the richest, most powerful country in the world to being not that. Yeah, I guess so. Saving America from being the richest country of all time is insane. Not gonna lie. Good night. Saving America from success, right? Saving America from success is really the goal. What is this? 1 second. I love America. I love politics. Man, I'm wacky when I don't have my ADHD medication. I guarantee. I tell you what. One second. Wahaha. I yawn a lot more too, bro. Nah, I'm going to bed early tonight. Maybe my sleeping problems are because of my ADHD meds, bro. RFK was right. RFK was white, bro. Oh. Oh, man. Let me see. How to... I'm sorry. I'm wacky tonight. I'm wacky tonight. Okay. This is Raislin. This is the worst time for debate night. I'll have you know. The worst time for the sleepy night. Oh God.
What's up, Jolah?
Hi, Rob. What's up? Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Yeah, I know nothing about you. Someone said that you were streaming, and I was supposed to have a debate tonight, and I'm a meathead, and it's next Thursday, not this Thursday. So I was like, oh, I screwed the pooch on that one.
Yeah, I
So-
usually take random callers on a phone number on YouTube Shorts. So I get a really random collection of callers. So I'm never guaranteed anyone calling in. But yeah, I could do a little introduction. And I've seen you
Real
around,
quick,
obviously.
would you do you mind calling in through my StreamYards? It'll just be the
Oh, yeah, for
audio
sure,
quality
for
will be
sure.
better on my. Is that all right? If I
Yeah, definitely.
let me put the link to that and I'll send that to you DM. There you go. And it's just I'm a boomer, or I don't know what I am. I'm a millennial, I think technically, but I know nothing about tech. So I can't figure out how to
Me
do the
either.
audio correctly through Discord and StreamYard simultaneously. So if you just join that StreamYard link, then I'll be good. So
All right,
we'll see you in a
got
second then.
See you there. I'm kicking Raislin. Let me stop yawning, bro. Why you guys keep making me yawn? Holy crap. I can't access that? Okay. Sorry, my thing's messing up. It's whatever. Let's just break this out. Whatever. Microphone's working.
There we go. Now we got him. Oop. There we go.
I'm trying to get my microphone or my camera working real quick.
Okay. I'll put you in the back if you want me to wait.
All right, yeah, sounds good. I just need 1 second. My bad.
Great. You got something real quick? I'm going to debate this guy. What's up?
Oh, I was going to debate that guy. I was going to debate you, actually.
Oh,
I was here to help you out, man. I didn't know if you had a debate for tonight. Well, apparently you thought you had a debate, but you didn't have a debate. And
right. So
I'm like, I'm down. Let's make it happen.
Well, I thought we would agree on most things, so I'm looking for someone who I think would legitimately disagree with me on a lot. Which someone recommended this person, Jolah, so I'm going to debate him here this evening. So
Okay. All
that's the plan. We'll see how well it works. He'll probably crush me, and then I'll be really upset and rage quit.
You know, rage quit.
You know how that goes. All right, man. I'll talk to you soon, Grit. I'm going to bring him on. Thanks, man.
All right, man.
There we go, Jolah. What's happening?
Nothing much. How are you, sir?
I'm good. I'm disappointed. I was hoping that you were like some ridiculously ugly troll, and then if you crush me in a debate, I could be like, "Look at you, though." Like, you know. So that's always a good win.
You know what? I actually do have commentary for the left. I think you might agree. Well, I guess just to start off, so I'm actually from. I know you're a Pennsylvania boy, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, I'm from like the coal region. If you know where that is, so like
up north, northern Pennsylvania.
Yeah, I was like an hour in proximity to like Centralia. Where all
Okay. Yeah.
The 50-year fire that'll be burning for another 200 years.
Wasn't that like the Silent Hill movie? Isn't that where like the inspiration was for it being filmed?
I think so. I know some people that did like if you go on Snapchat or Instagram, they have like the little mini TV shows. I know people that actually went on the fake ghost shows. And gave a fake testimony about how he was like in the cemetery at night in Centralia walking through and he saw like smoke come up and someone started chasing him. So they do a lot of the shooting around there because it is like a ghost town. I think there's 2 houses there, No, but if anyone wants to look that up, Centralia, Pennsylvania, a really interesting story about an underground mine that
Still
basically
on?
got fire.
Is it still on fire?
Yeah, it'll be on fire for like another 100 years or more because
Yeah.
it's just enough oxygen for it to smoke, and keep going, but not enough oxygen for it to like burn out. So
Yeah, that's pretty crazy. But yeah, that's interesting. I'm from Clarion County. I don't know if you're. I'm about an hour and a half, hour 45 minutes north, east of Pittsburgh, so in a rural area there. And I went to Clarion University in Clarion County there. So
so you're around Butler then, where the
yes, 40
happened.
minutes. Yeah, right. I worked that day. I was going to go to that rally, but I was working, so wasn't there. Probably a good thing. But yeah, I've been to the Butler Fairgrounds many times. I've seen that building. I actually have a friend whose job is working. Well, okay, let me rephrase that. I have a friend whose friend's job is working in that building, where the shooter was at. So
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, I'm definitely, I guess I'll say progressive. I hate political labels because it really is annoying. Because I'm not super crazy on, I guess you could say, guns or whatever. Especially being from Central PA, it was never really that much of an issue. I mean, I grew up around basically no people, so that topic never even, never even came up. But I'm definitely for, I guess you could say, pro-worker policies, pro-union policies, higher taxes than what we have right now. Maybe some type of like minimum tax for the wealthy instead of our convoluted tax system right now. I'm definitely pro things like the CHIPS Act for manufacturing policy. Against the tariffs that are happening right now. I'm against the SAVE Act that they just passed, which is a really fun one to talk about. But yeah, I'm generally in that field. I'd say somewhere between like I don't know, some boring guys like between Kyle Kalinske and David Pakman, if you guys know who they are.
David Pakman. I like David Pakman's debates now, and he just asks questions. So it's actually not a bad thing to do, that you learn to like make your argument in the form of a question. Well, why would he do that? What do you think about this? Because it gives a perception that you're controlling the discussion, right? Like you think about it, like in your life, where have you been? What types of people are asking questions? Like a teacher, an attorney, right? Things of that nature. So it's like, I always find that interesting when I watch David Pakman. It's always an interesting device that he's employing there to control it. Yeah, I mean, we talk about whatever you like. I will say real quick, just anecdotal on the gun story. Like, it's interesting you say that. Everyone I know that owns guns, like there's, coming from my perspective, it's like, well, the Second Amendment's fighting government tyranny. And that's true. I know a lot of people that they would cite that as one of the big reasons they own gun. But easily the most common reason to own a gun where I live is because most of the people I know rely on shooting a deer for food for the winter. Everybody hunts. Well, it's less and less every year. But when I grew up and went to high school, it was nothing for people to have their pickup truck as they were seniors that would drive to school, and they'd have a gun rack in the back of their truck, and their gun would be there, and they'd bring their camo, and then you go out hunting after school. So it's like when I did debate in college, I'd run into a lot of people who lived their entire lives in cities, and it was like they couldn't believe it. They're like, well, what kind of things can you hunt and eat? And I was like, we used to go small game hunting. You'd shoot squirrel. You could have like up to 8 per time you went out. And they're like, you've eaten squirrel? But it's different worlds if you're not from an area like this to realize like that's just part and parcel of the culture. I know Democrats that are like super progressive pro-union people. They're hunting. Like it's around here. It is a big thing where even the Democrats are pro-gun because to them it's not even this tyranny thing. It's a utility thing. It's like, yeah, we live in the woods. We have guns, So it is interesting. I think a lot of people don't realize that even if it's niche, there are people that have policies, believe in policies that seem to go against the grain because of the unique geographical area they're living in. And, another example could be right-wingers that are pro-union in very specific unions, such as unions that have to do with police or unions that have to do with sort of energy workers, coal and things like that. So it's interesting when you find those little fractures in sort of political ideology where it's like, you get part of you says you should side with one. One thing you said there, though, you said you're pro-labor. Like, we could get to talking specifics on tariffs, whatever you want to talk about. But just to start the conversation, what do you think about so many unions starting to go for Trump? And it seems that like he is being seen by many unions and by many workers as the more pro-labor. Even the tariffs, a lot of industries are looking at farming industry, steel industry, manufacturing, that it is now the Republicans, in particular MAGA, that's the pro-labor party.
I definitely think politics right now operates on a very cultural level. So very few decisions, even for labor movements, will be made purely from material or purely from economic policy. So I think, first off, the mentality in America where it's like, give me a chance to compete, make the playing field more level and will perform, definitely supersedes other attitudes versus, for example, like the CHIPS Act or other forms of the government subsidizing something. I feel they would rather say, have tariffs so we have a better chance to compete rather than the government picking who's going to get government funds, picking winners and losers, picking which corporations get subsidies. So I think that's one of the big mentalities. And labor unions have always been pretty protectionist when it comes to outside, trade deals and especially China. And I think like even Bernie would talk, and he spoke on, I think Anderson Cooper, like last night, about how, he's pretty protectionist. He was against the normalization of relationships with China, at least how he constructed them in the 90s and 2000s. Mostly, I would definitely say under Bill Clinton, the most for sure. But yeah, I think it mostly connects culturally. And Trump also just talks about a lot of issues that culturally connect to union workers, and I'd say even for farmers too, because I don't think Trump's policies are very pure, pro-farmer, especially with the way he needs to bail them out. He seems to not understand soybean farmers at all, or their issues with the reciprocal tariffs from China. But farmers also connect culturally to a more Christian, and when I say Christian, I mean independent Christian. So and this is one big issue that liberals don't have, or that liberals do have with Christianity as well. The Catholic Church and other churches that are more, I guess you could say, establishment focused and more leadership focused, like in terms of like what is the governmental structure of it, they are far different from the independent churches you'll see all throughout Indiana and Iowa and Ohio, and even some in Pennsylvania. Those like independent churches are going to be far more in farming communities and far more, I guess you could say, fundamentalist. In a non-negative term, I mean, some areas may be negative, but more fundamentalist and more attached to the religion in a different way than I guess you could say like the normal what Christians will see as the Catholic Church and and all that kind of stuff, like more than they would be.
I certainly think that there's truth to the fact that there's crossover, so cultural values sometimes could supersede traditional what we thought that the parties represented. But I think that even if we set that aside, I think that there is a belief that sort of the NAFTA type policies that started under Bill Clinton and then policies that we've seen, basically, I would argue from both the Republican and Democrat Party, even if they supported, quote, unions, the Democratic Party, I think that a lot of workers, including many union workers in particular fields, feel that neither party has really had interest of the middle class working people. And the data does certainly back up that the middle class is eroding in this country, that wealth disparity, regardless of what president has been in his office, has been increasing. And one of the things I say all the time, we could argue about whether or not Trump's policies would be good for manufacturing, the middle class, labor, etc. But what's undoubtable is there are millions of people that find themselves in that category or were previously in that category and feel they've been left behind, that believe Trump's the best option for that. And I think the big reason for that is the bar is so low. I think that labor in this country feels that no one has represented them for like decades. They feel that someone at least talking to them and saying, hey, we love blue collar work. You're the backbone of the country, like Trump did, and going around and talking to these people. And even stories you hear of Trump before he was like into politics, where he'd be like, I'd be shooting the breeze with the construction workers and things like that. None of that matters in an objective scale of would your policies be good for labor, but certainly it seems to speak to people in labor that this guy at least looks at us as equals or as important and doesn't look at us as like people that like, haha, learn to code when you lose your jobs. We don't care. You're beneath us. We're academics. We're in ivory towers. You're stupid people that are forced to work with your hands, and you should just shut up and accept your place and your dwindling status in this country. So I think for those reasons, yeah, you're certainly right that there's these cultural, like Christianity, other cultural values, but I think that the bar is so low. And I think this is an area that I could reach across with people that are more progressive, maybe of a Bernie Sanders-esque vibe, where it's like, when they talk about the disenfranchised American worker, I agree. I may disagree on what the solutions will be to help them, but I don't think that either political party prior to Bernie or Trump had anyone that was serious at the national contention level for president that really spoke to the working class. And as a result, we've seen the promises that were given post-NAFTA and China entering the WTO. were lies or they were failures. We have not seen robust growth for people that used to have these great manufacturing jobs. We've seen them slip into a lower and lower class, and increasingly the middle class becoming a dream that's unreachable, particularly from working class young people now, which many, even owning a home, seems impossible. As such, that's why I'm sort of in favor of at least Trump trying something, because I think had Kamala won, it would have been a status quo of what Joe Biden was doing and what Obama did previously and what George W. Bush did, which would have just been to continue to drive up the debt, continue to print money, continue to have inflation, and for manufacturing that we would rely on for many things in this country, like steel manufacturing or medicine manufacturing, to go to places that are geopolitical rivals. And inevitably, if nothing changes, the United States will falter not only from its top spot in the world, but instead of becoming a multipolar world, we'll quickly find ourselves in the hands of our adversary, like we saw with COVID with China, where all of a sudden we're reliant on China for PPE, we're reliant on China for simple pharmaceuticals to treat things like colds. Hell, we're reliant on China for ammunition manufacturing and steel manufacturing that would be necessary if needed to fight a hot war with them. So I think even if you disagree, and I don't know that Trump's policy will be a success or not, but at least it's a radical departure from the status quo, which needs to happen. Because if we continue down this path, the American worker's screwed.
Well, what I would say about Democrats, and this is another cultural thing, but most Democrats that are in leadership are from New York or California. You know, all the TikTok boys are from California or New York. The Pod Save America guys are from like Massachusetts or New York or California. They're all from those like 3 states, and they really don't know how to connect. And when Biden says learn how to code, the response probably should be, you know, there's really nice plants in West Virginia now. There really are like battery plants, and you know, if we want to build or make semiconductors here or do you know, more precious metals or, you know, whatever we can move to America with the CHIPS Act, it should be we're going to replace this with this. We have a lot of coal mines, a lot of sinkholes that go down. If you drop a rock down, it'll take 20 seconds before you hear a bump, you know, down the sinkhole from the mines. We have all this polluted water. We can replace these old torn down mine shafts with these companies that are in West Virginia. And my thing with trade deals, if we're already in this position, the big thing is our country is getting richer. America is rich. So acting like, you know, these other countries are screwing us off. The other countries are not screwing us off. If anything, we screwed other countries off to get to where we are. But if we have this wealth and people are mad about it, the issue is not really, you know, the practice. It's who has all the wealth, who has all the money. And if you have this machine of global trade being so productive and efficient, I would say if we're moving manufacturing back, then use that wealth, use our military and our influence that we have as the world reserve currency, use all that power to first build the factories we need, to build that manufacturing here, use it to subsidize companies here that'll be taking a loss in order to fund these changes. And I think that'd be an effective strategy. But like these tariffs right now, China's eating right now. China's getting deals with Europe they never thought would be possible, dropping tariffs for EVs and everything. You know, China definitely right now is you know, emboldening and strengthening their relationships with all these countries we don't want them to be connected to. We're doing it through terrible policy. They're saying they're going to organize a trade deal with 50 million countries in like a week after it took them like 2 years for Canada and Mexico. With the USMCA, which I think most of us would agree it was a decent way to build on NAFTA. But it's just totally everything they're saying right now makes zero sense. It's not tethered in reality. The numbers are insane. No company's going to invest in America when the tariffs are changing constantly. And it's also the biggest tax increase in pretty much American history, but definitely in the past like 80 years for working class people. It's the biggest tax increase. And it's being done through central planning like Maoism or communism, with the president just going, you know, taxes up, taxes down. And the president should not be doing or leveraging taxes in that way. And I also don't want working class people to pay for this initiative. You know, like I said, the rich people benefit from the trade deals. The rich people got tons of money from the trade deals. They should pay for our way out of it, not the working class people. The working class people should not pay for our way out of the trade deals.
But they're not going to, right? Like, so right now what you're seeing, the reaction to the stock market, it's basically, although it is true that the stock market, I think people are insane that you see that are Trump supporters like, burn it all down. I know people that are invested in the stock market, so leave it collapse. It's not that simple. If the stock market collapse, there'll be pain suffered for everyone. Like that's
retirement.
I don't think I need to explain that to you. Like we would agree on that, I think. Now, certainly it will disproportionately hurt people that own more stocks, which disproportionately is the top 10%. In fact, even the top 1%. So in effect, the people right now in the immediacy that are affecting the brunt will be people that are in that top percent. The problem is even any solution that you could come up with that anyone who seriously, I'll start with this. How about this? Can you name me the national level politician that has suggested a plan that you think would be good to affect this wealth disparity and the hollowing out of the middle class in our country?
Well, I would say the CHIPS Act is the best example of a policy that was bipartisan, and the manufacturing increase in America for total manufacturing spending peaked under the last month of Biden. It's now declining for the first time in 4 years. It's declining now under Trump.
First off, the CHIPS Act, I haven't done my research on this recently, but when the CHIPS Act passed and like the following year after that, many of the factories that we told came here and were investing were actually factories that were already planned, and you had plans to come before that. Now, there have been a few since then that have agreed to come about, but I think at most it's like 50,000 manufacturing jobs that they're trying to claim that perhaps, and that's a very generous number. The idea, like the jobs that were being created under the Biden administration were predominantly government jobs and jobs that were going to people that were foreign born. And most of these numbers are manipulated anyways. But even if you accept the numbers, real wage growth was stagnant under the Biden administration, absolutely stagnant. So if I ask you like, well, can you name me the national politicians that had policies that were pro-worker? If it was so good, why did workers, in fact, union members, for the first time in a long time, start to break towards Trump? The truth is because the data is manipulated and the economy wasn't the rosy outlook that we were told. The truth is the Biden administration and by extension Kamala Harris weren't going to do anything that would change the fortunes. And in addition to that, any problems you have against free marketism with tariffs, it seems that massive subsidies start to fall into very similar problems. And the other thing I'll say real quick, when it comes to market manipulation, etc., I'm sort of with you. I think that tariffs as a negotiating strategy isn't a bad thing, right? But I don't want to see them implanted long term. I would rather see more of a free trade type system. I think there are other things we could do like deregulation, et cetera, that will make the United States more favorable. However, what I will say is that you can't really, if Europe decides, well, we're going to go with China instead of the United States because we find China unpredictable, China's response is to devalue their currency. They constantly do this sort of manipulation. So if the idea is, well, we're going to go with China because they're more stable, I don't think that'll be the case. I think what you're likely to find, and I could be wrong, I don't have a lot of confidence in this. I think that because anytime you're trying to do a radical shakeup of the status quo, the people that are on the top of the status quo, which are the wealthiest, not just in the United States, but in the world, are going to have disproportional power because of our massive government system, which is another reason to have a smaller government instead of a bigger one. And they're going to wield that power to try to make sure that the status quo doesn't radically change. And so I think anytime you have a shakeup of that, whether it be this, or if it was a Bernie Sanders-esque plan that's like, we're going to massively tax the rich, you would see the stock market declining in that world as well. So we'll see how this plays out. But my guess is that you'll see European countries will come to a negotiating table with the United States. I don't know that the deals would be as favorable as Trump would have his supporters believing, but I don't think that it'll be a mass exodus to China. If anything, the mass exodus to China probably has more to do with the fact that we've had a disastrous war in Ukraine that we've propped up. Now even the New York Times is admitting that the United States was proffering the entire time, even though Biden's administration lied about it, which drove the BRICS Union and drove all of these, quote, hostile countries into embracing China. And if anything, that gives them the leverage necessary to continue to do so in the future.
So, I should have wrote down a couple points, but when it comes to the middle class in America, the worst thing you can do is kill anything that starts with Medicaid or Medicare, or just attack the stability of Social Security and the ability for Social Security and the VA to serve people. Those are huge stimulus to the economy, and it serves people very well. In rural areas, rural hospitals will shut down like crazy if they make any cuts to Medicaid and Medicare. And I know the budget framework talks about 880 billion over a certain amount of time, but Republicans wanting to cut that spending at the same time doing tariffs. We can't go away from the fact that these tariffs are a tax on the working class in America. We're cutting taxes for the wealthy and we're taxing working people instead. We're giving a 10% across the board tariff on every country, and 25% on Canada and Mexico still, and then 145%, I think it is now. It keeps going up every day on China. And the fact is, if our president is going to, if we're not going to have laws in America, if we're not going to have anti-corruption measures in America, if the president is going to be switching tariff policy like this so rapidly and attacking Canada and Mexico, which is vital to our national security to be friends with them if we do get into a war with China, by chance, and also attacking Europe, saying the EU was formed to screw over America. That's the worst way possible for American stability to be in any solid position. And I agree, like the fact so many countries will go more towards China is a bad thing, but I think it speaks even worse to where America is viewed right now in the global system. And these tariffs are going to end manufacturing jobs. It's going to shut down factories. Google shutting down, or Microsoft is, I think Microsoft or Google, they announced 2 of their data centers they're going to build are going to be canceled. In Erie, that recycling plant is now canceled. That was going to be, I think it was like $300 million recycling plant. That was going to provide a decent number of jobs as well. So this manufacturing is going to be shut down because the input costs into our country is going to be so increased by these tariffs. There's so many small businesses reeling right now. That 10% can be make it or break it for small businesses. And we saw during COVID, we saw during the financial crisis in 2008, we saw during every financial crisis, pretty much except the Great Depression, because we had to restructure our system to tax the wealthy a lot more. Every time there's a financial crisis, you said that Wall Street suffers. Wall Street always looks like they suffer first. But what happens is there's a huge market crash, then they lay everyone off, everyone loses their jobs, everyone loses their housing. And then after the market crash, the wealthy become even wealthier. The biggest jumps in the wealth of the top 1% came in 2008 and 2020. Anyone can look up the amount of wealth the top 1% gained in 2020. Although we said small businesses were gonna, suffer, and Wall Street is gonna suffer with the stock market, just like it is now. Whenever the economy fragments, they have enough money to withstand it. They can just move assets around, let small businesses die, and then pick up the pieces and get even stronger.
Well, the problem is everything you said would also be true under the plan that you're suggesting. So the people that say, well, you know what the solution is? Tax the billionaires more. That also will be a tax on the working class. Tariffs isn't a direct tax. It is basically a consumer level tax, because what happens is the manufacturers of the goods will pass that on to the actual consumers. Now, the truth is it's not a one-to-one thing. For example, a 10% tariff won't directly lead to a 10% increase in a product's price. What's likely to happen is the foreign producers that will be the countries that are tariffed will eat a small percentage of that, and then the producers in the United States that are reliant on those products will also probably eat a small percentage. So let's say it was each 1%, then that causes an 8% increase in the product in the United States. Not good for the United States consumer, I get that. But 2 things. One, a radical increase on tax on the wealthy also won't be eaten by the wealthy. You've just given the rationale, no matter what's ever done, the rich will come out on top. So if we have lockdowns for COVID, it'll always end up benefiting the rich, which is exactly what happened, which the people that you support, like Joe Biden, etc., were vehemently in favor of that policy.
Hell yeah.
In fact, right, you're for that? You were for
And so
lockdowns?
was Donald Trump. So was Donald Trump.
Now, Donald Trump, to his great shame, and one of the biggest criticisms of him was he didn't, as president, order lockdowns, but he seemed to pay lip service to them. But regardless of what you think about it, the Democrats certainly were massively more in favor of lockdowns. And by the time Trump was ending his first term, were criticizing him for not embracing lockdowns and saying that his policies and his signaling was going to be a disaster for this country. In fact, they took states that had great governors like Ron DeSantis, who actually I would have chosen before Trump. They looked at that and said that it was going to be the forever purge and that there were going to be bodies piling up in the street in Florida. I just want to be clear before we get further in this economic discussion. You favored lockdowns.
For some duration. When conservatives talk like we couldn't leave our houses or anything, I mean, all of us were at the parks, we were having a good old time outside, and the hospitals were filled up in much of the country. It's hard to make policy at every individual level in local markets, but nurses and doctors were suffering during this period, and for a few months for sure. And there was actual reason for that crash. There was an actual reason for that crash, by the way. This crash right now is just
no. There was a
being
reason for that
weenie.
crash, because the policies that people had that were disastrous, that didn't protect our health, instead intentionally sabotaged our economy, which we're still feeling the ramifications of today. That was
not having a bolstered healthcare system really hurt America, but also just like in general, like the hospitals were filled up. If you got into a car crash and did not have COVID, your care was compromised. Like there were other issues with the lockdown.
So when you say the hospitals are filled up, in what way? Are you saying that like the emergency room beds were filled up? Or are you saying the ICU beds were filled up?
Yeah, there were doctors committing suicide because their hospitals were filled up and they were seeing patients die so rapidly. And then a car crash victim would come in and get COVID in the doctor. Like this all piled on top of each other. Those few months during the pandemic were pretty shitty. They were pretty bad. And I think we forget that, but I'm just saying, like, when it comes to that crash, there was an actual fundamental reason for doing that with the limitations of our healthcare system. Right now, the economic issues that are going to come down on small businesses here, if he keeps these tariffs on, these 10% tariffs, and the 145% tariffs or whatever, although China's going to ship through Vietnam probably, regardless. But if he keeps those, and it's not going to be for saving lives or any theory that has ever worked in human history. It's just going to be because Trump is, failed to study, economics.
Depending on the numbers you use, many of the official studies actually show that ICU bed usage throughout much of COVID was lower than on average. And for every story you talk about, a doctor committed suicide because of the work burden they were having, let me tell you an anecdotal story. So in Clarion County and in Jefferson County, which are the two counties that one I live in and one that's closest to me. I think it was the Butler Health Network was some of these hospitals. They all went through the same network. They, during the pandemic, ended up laying off some 500 healthcare workers and nurses. You want to know why? Because the hospitals were empty. Because in places like Clarion and Jefferson, at one point, Jefferson County had a total of 0 cases of COVID up until that point. Now, my brother had horrible seizures where he would have grand mal seizures to the point where he shattered both of his collarbones at points. At one point, he has a seizure, and my mom drives him out to Jefferson County, assumes he'll be there all night, as he always was. She pulls in, the hospital's completely empty. She goes in with my brother. They tell her she can't come in because of COVID, even though there's been 0 cases at that point in Jefferson County. Goes into the hospital. To her chagrin, within 2 hours, they released him because they were worried that at any moment there could be a significant rush and every hospital bed could fill up. And so therefore they had to send him home. He had a grand mal seizure on the 20-minute drive back home. As he was choking on the seatbelt, my mom tried to release him from the seatbelt. He fell out of the car on the side of the highway and broke his collarbone again. He was supposed to have brain surgery that was delayed because people's health was significantly impacted because of the fear of COVID, which ended up in most of the time during COVID, ICU beds weren't at the capacity of 100%, 95% that people were talking about. They ended up getting rid of a bunch of elective surgeries and things like that. But when we say elective, we're not talking like liposuction. We're talking about things like that, like brain surgery. So he had to have that put off for over a year. There's tons of people that had disparate health outcomes because they were afraid to go to the hospital or because they couldn't go to the hospital. And there had hospitals where they were laying off healthcare workers because there was no profitability because no one was showing up. The truth is, lockdowns did nothing